Described as kind, loving, and driven, Sherri Rasmussen was admired by many. But one day, something unexpected happened to her. The house was in shambles, and there, sprawled on the living room floor, was Sherri. She had been severely beaten and shot multiple times. Despite her athletic build and height of 6 feet, Sherri had fought fiercely against her attacker. A post-mortem examination revealed she had suffered 3 gunshot wounds to her chest, which pierced her heart, lungs, and spine. Who was Sherri Rasmussen? Why was she killed? Who was the culprit? This is your partner in crime stories. Subscribe and let's move along this mysterious journey ahead. Sherri Rasmussen was born on February 7, 1957, to Nels and Loretta Rasmussen. She grew up with 2 sisters. In 1985, when Sherri was 29, she married John Ruetten. They lived in a secure complex on Balboa Boulevard in Van Nuys, California. John worked as an engineer, while Sherri was the nursing director at Glendale Adventist Medical Center. Sherri excelled in critical care nursing, often giving talks and presentations to fellow nurses. She was known for her intelligence, skipping 2 grades in school. Described as kind, loving, and driven, Sherri was admired by many. On February 24, 1986, John arrived home from work just before 6 p.m. The moment John got home, he sensed trouble. Sherri had called in sick that morning, yet the garage door was open and her BMW was gone. He remembered buying her the silver 2-door BMW as an engagement gift the previous year. Knowing she was unwell, John found it strange that she'd be out driving. As John stepped into their home, a horrifying sight awaited him. The house was in shambles, and there, sprawled on the living room floor, was Sherri. She had been severely beaten and shot multiple times. Despite her athletic build and height of 6 feet, Sherri had fought fiercely against her attacker. Evidence suggested the attack began in the dining room, where a blood trail and a bloody handprint showed she had struggled to escape or reach the panic button on the alarm console. Before she could reach safety, the attack continued in the living room. Sherri was bitten on her left forearm during the struggle and then knocked unconscious by a heavy vase to her head. The attacker grabbed a quilt, likely to muffle any noise, and fatally shot Sherri. A post-mortem examination revealed she had suffered 3 gunshot wounds to her chest, which pierced her heart, lungs, and spine. On that fateful day, a housekeeper in the neighboring house remembered hearing a scuffle and a scream, but didn't report it. Thinking it might be a domestic matter, she didn't recall any gunshots. The prevailing theory was that a burglary had turned deadly, especially since Sherri had stayed homesick from work. It was thought that a burglar, unaware of Sherri's presence, may have committed the crime and fled in her BMW. Valuables were left behind, suggesting a hurried escape. Along with the car, the only missing item was John and Sherri's marriage certificate. Lloyd Mahan from the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office examined Sherri's body for evidence, but found nothing significant. The bite mark on her arm was swabbed and taken as evidence. In 1986, Sherri's parents arrived in Los Angeles from Arizona seeking answers. The next day, they met with the lead detective, who assured them that Sherri's husband, John, was not a suspect. The detective explained that they were focusing on 1 or more burglars in connection with Sherri's murder. Nels informed the detective that Sherri had been troubled by one of John's ex-girlfriends, who had been hostile towards her. This woman had even visited Sherri's workplace a month or 2 before. Though Nels didn't know her name, he knew she worked for the Los Angeles Police Department. Nels believed this woman should be a prime suspect. The police leaned towards the burglary theory as more plausible. Sherri's abandoned car was found about a week later, but it didn't provide any new leads. Then, 2 months after her murder, a potential break emerged when 2 men attempted a burglary nearby, one armed with a gun. The focus of the investigation shifted to locating these men. Pictures of the suspects were shared, but they remained elusive. Months passed, and the case grew cold. Sherri's parents offered a $10,000 reward in hopes of finding her killer. They tirelessly kept the case in the public eye. In November 1987, they held a press conference, renewing the reward offer. John initially mentioned his ex-girlfriend to the police, but gradually he faded from view, leaving Sherri's parents to advocate for her. The next year, Nels wrote to the chief of police, Daryl Gates, asking for a closer look at the case, particularly focusing on John's ex-girlfriend, who was a police officer, but he didn't get a reply. Nels also repeated his suspicions about John's ex to the detectives, who brushed it off, saying he watched too much TV. Despite this, Sherri's parents persisted in seeking answers. Loretta, Sherri's mother, regularly phoned the Van Nuys Police Department for updates on the investigation. In 1993, 7 years after Sherri's death, her parents went to Los Angeles to meet with a detective who had taken over the case from Lyle's retirement. The new detective told Nels and Loretta that he had gone through the original case notes and was trying to move the investigation forward. Despite efforts, generating new leads seemed unlikely, and the police couldn't identify any suspects. In the following years, there were some advancements, notably discovering that the bite mark on Sherri's arm was made by a woman. However, due to the high number of cold cases being investigated with improved DNA technology, progress was slow. It would take another 16 years before significant progress was made in Sherri's case. In 2009, armed with the knowledge that the bite mark on Sherri's arm was made by a female, the Van Nuys Police Department re-examined the case. They focused on the fact that the murderer was likely a woman. A list of 5 female suspects was compiled, including John's ex-girlfriend, Officer Stephanie Lazarus, who had been promoted to detective by then. The investigators vowed to discreetly investigate Stephanie, whether to protect her reputation or not. With 3 of the 5 suspects quickly cleared, including a fellow nurse from the hospital, only Stephanie and Detective Lazarus remained. The detectives decided to investigate the nurse first, but her DNA sample came back negative. Now, the focus turned solely to Detective Stephanie Lazarus. Could it be possible that one of their own was responsible for this brutal, unsolved murder? As the investigation delved into Stephanie's past and her connection to Sherri, it emerged that Stephanie had met John, Sherri's husband, during their time in the same UCLA dorm in the early 1980s. They had an on and off causal relationship over a few years. In 1985, John's relationship with Sherri became serious, leading to a quick engagement in the summer and marriage by November. However, just 3 months later, Sherri was dead. At the time, Stephanie, aged 26, was working as a patrol officer. She later became a detective in 1993 and married a fellow police officer. In 1996, they adopted a little girl. By 2006, Stephanie was assigned to the art theft department within the Los Angeles Police Department. Throughout her lengthy tenure with the police department, Stephanie had a clean disciplinary record. However, during the investigation, it was discovered that 13 days after the murder, Stephanie had reported a theft of one of her firearms, M38 revolver, the same type used in the murder. It seemed like the case was edging closer to a resolution, but without definitive proof, only a series of coincidences remained. The police needed Stephanie's DNA to progress further. On May 27, 2009, a plainclothes detective followed Stephanie as she ran errands. When Stephanie disposed of a cup and straw, the surveillance team quickly retrieved it from the trash. In 2009, after years of investigation, a breakthrough occurred in Sherri's case. DNA extracted from a cup and straw discarded by Stephanie matched the DNA found on Sherri's arm 23 years earlier. A small team of detectives continued their work, preparing for Stephanie's arrest on June 5th in 2009. Under the guise of interviewing her for a stolen art case, Stephanie was brought in for questioning about Sherri's murder. When the police mentioned they had DNA evidence, Stephanie abruptly left the interview room and was arrested in the hallway. She was held on a $10 million bail and charged with Sherri's murder. The case went to trial in 2012 and lasted nearly a month. The prosecution presented the DNA evidence and witnesses supporting their argument that Stephanie was jealous of Sherri's relationship with John. It came to light during the trial that John had been involved with Stephanie before marrying Sherri, which troubled Sherri. While there was no evidence implicating John in the murder, Sherri had expressed concern about Stephanie's behavior and her relationship with John. Stephanie's defense argued that the DNA evidence was unreliable and that she had not been investigated at the time of the murder, leading to a lack of valuable evidence and testimony that could have cleared her. Despite their arguments, the jury deliberated for 3 days before finding Stephanie guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to 27 years to life in prison. In 2015, an appeal upheld Stephanie's guilty verdict. Despite Sherri's parents repeatedly mentioning Stephanie as a suspect to the police over the years, she was not investigated initially. A lawsuit brought by Sherri's parents against the city and LAPD alleged misconduct and a cover-up in the investigation, but it was declined due to the statute of limitations expiring. In November 2023, Stephanie, now 63, appeared before the parole board for the first time. At the hearing, she admitted her involvement in Sherri's death, but did not apologize to the family. She downplayed her crime, claiming she never meant to kill Sherri. In December, it was reported that Stephanie was eligible for parole. As of April 4th, 2024, the governor referred her parole grant for review by the full board. If approved, Stephanie could be released this summer, serving just 15 years for a crime she remained free from suspicion for 23 years. What do you think about this case? Stay tuned. We'll catch you with a new nail-biting crime thriller tomorrow.